Welcome back to the What the Fork Happened This Week podcast. This week we've got a Sunderland special with Sunderland returning back to first team action against Gateshead on Saturday, an impending takeover, or is there a takeover? William's story is still not being quiet, and which Sunderland signings could we potentially see over the next fortnight? We do now, you alright?
Yeah, good in the circumstances.
Nice to have a game of football back on Saturday. So let's start straight from the off. What did you make of the game on Saturday?
Well, like you say, it was good just to get back to watching a live game of football. Typical pre-season game, not played with necessarily any real energy, but a chance to sort of run your eye over certain individuals, certain players, because there's been changes. And we've got the likes of Elliot Embleton and Jack Diamond coming to the squad, a few others of the younger members of the under-23s, Bailey Wright back, of course. The impressive, and I'm not sure yet how you pronounce his name, but the Kosovan Albanian Swiss centre-half, who was impressive in the short time he was on the pitch. Will Griggs scoring with his head. So, there were some positive things to take from it. And overall we saw, 22 players, 21 players. Lee Burge played the whole game, but they changed things over in the second half. Unfortunate for Embleton to get a knock. I'm sure he's fine, but what we did see of him in the time that he was on, he looked bright. I like the way he sort of managed to waltz into the box a couple of times. I still get the impression Sunderland do overplay it. I had a conversation with someone at the game that in League One sometimes, the ultimate aim is to win the game and don't worry too much about it being pretty, especially so this season. And there were a number of occasions you think, you're trying to play it into the box and play it through the box, when perhaps the better option is to sometimes just take a punt, take a shot from outside the box, especially since the Gateshead keeper looked vulnerable as well. So I felt that was something perhaps, needs working on for the season. Just be a bit braver around the penalty area in terms of taking opportunities. Because I had a conversation with someone about, at this level, if you lose the ball, you'll get it back quickly. It's not like in the Premier League or to a certain extent the Championship, where if you lose possession, it's sometimes very difficult to get it back. Yeah. In League One, if you lose possession, you're going to get it back quickly. So I think in that sense, you can be a bit more attack-minded and you can be a bit braver around the penalty area. But, that said, what we did see on Saturday, there was some quite, nice performances, some promise, difficult to really judge because the team gets changed around so much. And clearly it's an exercise just to get, matches and fitness into the players. And it's not long before the first game. So it's difficult to assess how they're going to develop what will be the first choice 11, especially with the news today that Conor McLaughlin and Tom Flanagan have been called up by Northern Ireland, so they both won't play in the first two games.
Sam, if anyone's listening, by the way, from outside of Sunderland, apologies in advance, but this has to be a Sunderland heavy podcast, and I'm pleased that it is. It's nice to get digging into Sunderland again for a change, but obviously, you touched on before, I can't pronounce his name. I cannot pronounce his name for love nor money. I'm sure I'll get round to it eventually. But left-sided centre-back, you touched on Flanagan there being out. But he's really, I don't know anything about him, but he's really, really highly rated, isn't he, back in his sort of homeland?
Yes. It's interesting. It came out of the blue on Saturday that Zamalji, is it?
Zamalji, I think, yeah. I can't pronounce the X at the start. It just doesn't work.
I don't know how it's Swiss, isn't it? So I don't know how they pronounce the X. You see, Tom Flanagan, I'm pleased he signed a new contract.
Same.
I think, yes, the season perhaps caught up with him last season, but I think as a ball-playing left-sided centre-back, he's good. And I think when he, Willis and Wright are I would imagine the first choice three, they I think will look a good three. And I think Zamalji, if he stays, if he is going to be signed, and I think he will be with Morgan Feeney as well, who came on in the second half. They've got cover there now, and Conor McLaughlin as well. So they've got 3 players as cover for your principal 3 centre halves. And from what I've seen of Jamalji on Saturday, Feeney didn't have a great deal to do, so jury's out on him. And Conor McLaughlin, when he stepped in, I think more as a centre back than a right back, he's looked okay. And as a player for cover, if he's going to be on the bench, fair enough. You'd hope that the other 3 don't pick up injuries. And on the whole, I think Bailey Wright was unlucky last season to pick up the injury he did. On the whole, Willis sailed through the season without really getting any serious injury problems. Doesn't look like the sort of player that's going to pick up those niggles that keep you out. Flanagan, less so. I mean, I know he had a few niggles, but I'm sort of fairly sanguine about the centre back situation. A little bit more worried about the fullbacks, to be honest. I still don't think they've got. With Denver Hume and Luke O'Nien, they are going to be the first choice pairing again. I'm still not absolutely convinced that they've got 2 fullbacks that are fullbacks, if you see what I mean, in the wing backs. Luke O'Nien, I think, yes, he likes to raid forward and get forwards, and he got forwards on Saturday. But I wonder if he, like a lot of people, would we rather see him in midfield and bring in a more orthodox right back? And Denver Hume, again, I like the way he gets forwards, but he does get exposed in, covering as a left back. Would we be better off seeing a more orthodox left back as well? But, time will tell, I think. I mean, there's a limit to how many players they can bring in, obviously, with the salary cap now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best thing about the first sort of 5-10 minutes of this podcast, though, is that we're actually talking about football when it comes to Sunderland, because let's be honest, it hasn't been like that, not just because of COVID, because of multiple reasons for quite a while. I suppose I've got to come on to it. The takeover is huge. I think everyone's discussed it. And I spoke to James Copley on the podcast last week, and we sort of discussed maybe from a fan's perspective, the prospect of, which I don't think is going to happen, William Storey, but William Storey's a man that you've spoken to. Obviously, he did I think it was his first interview, I think he did with yourself and Simon Pride. He's still kind of not being quiet, which I must be honest, I kind of hope that he will be, because I don't think there's any serious prospect of it. But I suppose you've got to take as you see. What did you make of William Storey when you spoke to him?
It's an interesting one, because on the day we spoke to William Storey, a lot of people say, well, why are you speaking to him? Well, the reason was that afternoon, William Storey was the story, if you like. He was all over social media. Everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
He was claiming to be a player, someone who was going to be taking over the football club. I think, journalistically then, it merited talking to him to find out where he was coming from.
Of course.
Now,
absolutely.
From what I understand, he's not. It's just not on the table. He's just not being looked at. It's not happening. But you always have this. I've had conversations at work with other colleagues. You always have this suspicion. You're 98% sure it's not happening. But there's that little 2%. What if it were to happen? You do want to try and cover your bases, if you like. But as far as I know, and as far as I'm concerned, he and Mark Campbell are nowhere near the table in terms of the takeover. And I think another thing about William Storey is he's just making too much noise. If you are a serious contender, if you like, in terms of taking over a football club or any business, you don't make the sort of noise that William Storey's making at the moment. And the comments he's making about what he knows about the club situation, it's all in the public domain anyway. All he's doing is picking out what everybody knows already and has been spoken about. So he's offering nothing new. And as I say, he's making a lot of noise. He's putting himself about. And even, you listen to what he says by his own admission, he's not at the table. He's saying he's made offers and he's looking to get into talks with the club, but it's just not happening. And he's not, and that's that, I think. In terms of the takeover itself, of course, there's been lots of talk and speculation, and ever since the period of exclusivity was revealed and I found out about that, everyone says, well, what's happening? Well, clearly I don't expect to hear anything until nearer the time that I was led to believe a deal could be concluded, and that's the start of the season, if not possibly the end of August. And of course, we're coming up towards that time now. Now, I've heard nothing to suggest it's not happening. The football club aren't making any comment on it because I think they don't want to get involved in, basically, as soon as they make any sort of comment, it could be misconstrued, misconstructed, misinformed. They don't want to get into that ball game, if you like. So they're purposely not making any comment, and purposely not making any comment about William's story, and staying well clear of it. But there is nothing to suggest that this takeover is not happening. I believe it is. It's just now waiting and seeing for those dates, the start of the season, predominantly, is to see whether we get any noise, if you like, from Stuart Donald to say that something has actually happened.
Just going back to William's story, and we will go into that period of exclusivity, but with William's story, I suppose there's two ways to thinking about it, really. And I can't remember if it was yourself that said it. I know somebody did, and I think it summed it up really well. In his own head, he's taken Sunderland over. I don't think it's a case of, is he just making noise because that sells his energy drink and puts his names out? There's people that think that. Or do you think he genuinely thinks that's going to happen? Because there is also the argument that, and I mean, I don't know where Stuart's at the moment. It's been a long time since I've spoken to him, and a long time since he spoke realistically to anyone at any sort of level outside of the Red and White Army meetings. But the thought process is that, and from what he said, he'll sell the club to anyone who passes a fit and proper test. That's how I interpreted it. So why would he turn down William's story, whether he's a good owner or a bad owner? Is it just a case of, does he think he's taken over the club in his own head, or is it a case of William's story is not wanted by Stuart Donald to purchase the club, and if not, why not?
Interesting. I think in my own mind, I think William's story, yes, in his own head, believes he can take over, and he's adamant in what he says that he's got the backing to do so. Fine, well and good. I think the fact that he's making all this noise and saying all those things is because he knows that Stuart Donald is currently talking to someone else who is in pole position, it would seem, to take over. And what William's story is hoping for is that person that Stuart Donald's talking to doesn't buy in the end, and that leaves him the opportunity to come in himself and, in his own mind, take over. But you mentioned the fit and proper persons and test, and the financial investigation that would need to be done into him. I think that that doesn't exactly inspire me with any particular confidence, and I suspect that would be very much the view of Stuart Donald. In the same way that that introspection of Mark Campbell's finances, came to the fore and it fell through. I think William's story would be subject to that same scrutiny, and I think when it comes to shove, as we've all seen, the figures don't seem to add up from his own personal bank account. My interpretation of everything is the fact that it is very quiet. And the conversations that I had with Stuart Donald before all this broke, as you mentioned, the Red and White Army and the fans groups meeting, when I last interviewed him and spoke to him, he was adamant that he's going. He couldn't take any investment because any investment that was being offered would basically mean he still had to be on the board. So he was turning away investment with a view, because he's leaving the club. I've got no reason to believe that that's not still the case. I think that is desperately what he's trying to do, is get out by hook or by crook. And when he says he'll sell to anybody, I think there are limits to that. He clearly won't sell to Mark Campbell. As I understand it, he clearly won't sell to William Story. So I think there you have to take it that the people, whoever it is he is selling to, have got more legitimacy, if you like, than either Mark Campbell or William Story. Now we're a week away from the end of August. We're a couple of weeks away from the start of the season. So fingers crossed something happens in the next fortnight. I know there's rumours on social media. Some people are saying, they understand that talks seem to be going well and that there could be a resolution very soon. Now I don't know where those rumours are emanating from, but I'd agree that I would hope that by the end of the month or the start of the season, something does happen, or something is said, or we get a much clearer idea of what's actually happening.
So maybe wishful thinking from maybe a lot of Sunderland fans' side, but obviously ready to go in Sunderland forums and the internet is not always the best place to read rumours, but needless, we need to address some of them. I think one of them last week was that I think it was Glenn Furman was in town, and there's still people still harbour the hope that FFP are going to take over. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But would you be surprised if this takeover had something to do with the Americans as they became known and maybe Satori?
No, not personally, because I think increasingly FPP have been on the scene. They've always been in the background at Sunderland, and with the increasing interest they're taking in English football, Derby County, Southampton, Sunderland, albeit under different names, it's the same people. I think because they've had contact for over a year with Sunderland, yes, I think there could well be some sort of link with the Americans. Now, this is my own opinion. It's not something based entirely on supposition. It's just based on the fact that they are players at Sunderland. They're involved. They've got money invested in the football club, and as I say, the increasing interest they're taking in English football. It would make sense for them still to be involved. So I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I think also because I was led to believe that the deal that Stuart Donald is putting together to sell wouldn't be the financial side of it, the due diligence side of it, won't be presenting anybody too many problems, which suggests it's someone who's already had some sort of involvement in Sunderland to see the books, if you like, which again suggests the Americans. And I know a lot's been said about Juan Sartori and his father-in-law at Monaco, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if there is some, there could possibly be, money from Monaco involved as well. But as I say, I don't know. It's my sort of gut intuition on that one. But going back to what you're saying about the Americans, yes, I personally think there could, down the line, if not now, be some sort of involvement from them. But hopefully in the next few weeks we'll find out.
Yeah, wait and see indeed. The only reason it made me think it could potentially be someone, and you've presented a lot of good arguments there for why it could be someone who's already involved due to their due diligence as well. And I'm no mind reader, and I'm certainly not a psychologist, but Phil Parkinson looks very relaxed for a man that could potentially have a new chairman to answer to in the coming weeks, which potentially means that anyone who's due to come in feels like keeping Parkinson in. I suppose it's guesswork, but do you think that Parkinson is going to be the man to lead the season in if there is a takeover? Do you think that kind of adds fuel to the fire that it could be someone like the Americans or Satori?
Well, it's always difficult, like we just don't know. But I mean, when Phil Parkinson was asked about the takeover after the game on Saturday, he was very relaxed about it. He wouldn't talk specifically about the takeover itself. But he said it doesn't affect. It's not affecting in any way his preparations for the season. The biggest thing that's affecting him at the moment is the salary cap. But he's was very relaxed about the whole takeover, or even being asked about it. So he didn't look like a man whose sort of face became creased with sort of irritation or sort of angst when that issue is brought up, because as everybody knows, for takeovers you often find new owners want new people in charge, but to all intents and purposes it looks like Phil Parkinson will be in charge in 2 weeks' time and for the beginning of the season. After that, it's down to the performance on the pitch, isn't it? If they're winning games, whoever owns the club, you'd be foolish to change the manager if you're in a position that you're in a position of strength. If you are winning games, different story if the season doesn't start as well as everybody hopes, but fingers crossed they do start well and we get some sort of stability on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. Still on the takeover, there's been a lot made about Stuart Donald's asking price, which is, I think, many people think far inflated for the football club that he currently holds and owns. Are we assuming then that whoever's got that period of exclusivity is met that asking price?
Don't know. I mean, I don't know the legal side, the ins and outs of period of exclusivity. I can only assume that it just means that Stuart Donald's only talking to one group. Now, I'm assuming that if it's talking to one group, that group may well be saying the asking price is too high.
Yeah.
if it's the group he wants to buy, you'll hope they'll reach the price, I suppose. But I mean, my guess, and it is only guesswork, is that will be one part of the discussion. Because, of course, periods of exclusivity, I don't know how long they necessarily last, but if they come to an end and there's no agreement, then presumably it opens the door to other bidders. That is, that's the process. But I think it's been well versed that the asking price is probably too high, and that's presumably down to the interested party to thrash out the deal, if that's what if there are serious bidders. And down the line, Stuart Donald's got to think about the best interests of not only himself but of the football club as well, and whoever's taking control.
There was a rumour the other day, again, another internet rumour. You've got to love the internet, because before that, I think it was just, what was it? What did they used to call that thing on teletext? Was a call when you used to call in to get the rumours and pay £5 a minute.
Oh.
I think they were probably slightly more reliable, but one of them was that Stuart Donald had turned down 35.7 million or something like that. To your knowledge, is there any substance to that, or is that just literally rumour?
I just don't know. I saw it, and I couldn't tell you one way or the other whether that was true or not. It's interesting to know where these rumours are sparked off from, because I'm having no contact whatsoever with Stuart Donald, or anybody at the football club is not talking about the takeover. So you wonder where, if there are these leaks, you wonder where they are. So it could be true, might not be true. I think in these circumstances, a bit of patience. I'd urge a bit of patience, really. We've been given a sort of date, and I would like to see that date come and go and see where we are then, as to progress or otherwise in those terms.
It's fantastic the way rumours can work. I mean, the one the other week was with William Story, of course, going into, I think it was the Port of Call, or it was Poetic License, I tell a lie, and Jack Rodwell. Rodwell following Jim Rodwell even.
Apparently total coincidence, absolute total
coincidence.
Jim was horrified when he saw him. But I mean, that's, is that William Story engineering these things because he knew that Jim Rodwell would have been up that week.
Because he's staying in that area, I just believe. And I think it was literally, I know that was complete coincidence. He's staying in that area and walked in 2 minutes afterwards. So it's maybe William Story just fantastic at self-promotion, because you've got to give him it.
Well, he's clearly very good at that. I mean, I half expected to see him outside the International Stadium on Saturday, and with photographs all around. I'm puzzled, perplexed as to what he's aiming for. If he's aiming for publicity for his energy drink, he's only going to get publicity in the Northeast in a very small parochial sort of way, if you like, for what he claims to be a multi-million pound industry. So, confirmed West Ham fan running around in a Sunderland top and making lots of noise, as I say, but all the while I'm thinking, as you said before, is it all in his head? Is he a bit of a fantasist? Is he a genuine player? We don't know the backers. We don't know ultimately, and he wouldn't reveal them. He says the NDA forbids him from doing that, but at the same time, he's being extremely vocal for someone who says there's an NDA. So it doesn't, in lots of ways, make a great deal of sense. But I think you just think in the circumstances, it's just not going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. And I suppose the NDA, you've got to look at what does that NDA include, but it's very easy for him to say everything apart from the important things that we want to actually hear, and say, I can say that because that's not included in the NDA, but this is. And I think it's a little bit too easy to kind of do what he's doing at the moment. It's a lot of noise without actually saying anything, isn't it?
Well, I think a lot of people, and look, I mean, the interesting thing is that we're in the situation where a lot of fans want Stuart Donald out. Fine. No problem with that at all. And Stuart Donald himself has said that he's getting out, right? We take these as the facts. Now there's a lot of speculation that it's not happening, there's no takeover, and it's just another whim from Stuart Donald just to try and buy time. Well, ultimately, it could be. I don't know. But we've got to take some things as facts. And from my understanding, there is a there are takeover talks taking place from what I've heard from within the club, in the sense they won't talk about it. And the fact, I think, many will remember when you look back to the takeover by Stuart Donald, we knew nothing about it until it happened. It was all quiet. And I just think I'm more inclined to believe things are happening when things are quiet than when there's a lot of noise. I think if you're genuinely a businessman and you're genuinely looking to spend millions, and we're talking millions of pounds, the last thing you want is this bandied around publicly. All those sort of deals take place behind closed doors. So in that sense, I think you just have to have an element of trust, if you like, that this is happening. And I use that word patience again, urge that, until the end of the month or the beginning of the season, which was the cut-off time that was given, then we can start agitating again, if you like, after that, if nothing has happened. And probably rightly so. I think there's no problem with that. And I've got no problem with fans' concerns. I understand why fans are worried and they're concerned and they're not hearing anything, because, the last few years haven't been great, and the position that Sunderland are in at the minute is wretched. And everybody's just, desperate for some good news.
I think when it comes to Sunderland as well at the moment, talking about people being quiet, I think if it's one person that's been quiet for about 2 years, Juan Sartori seems to be quite good at it. So hopefully he's getting hold of his dad and his billionaire friends to take us over. But on the playing side, which is obviously the bit we all really, really care about ultimately, we touched on a few of the new players that have came in. Obviously, we signed Remy Matthews, came in last week alongside Feeney. I still think we need to push on with a few more signings. I'm absolutely with you on the full-back positions. I think at the very least we could do with some backup, even if he's going with first team, something to push them. And it seems like he's very much doing that on the left-hand side. But one person that no one's actually touched on whatsoever, and I think no one was surprised to not see him there on the game on Saturday, but Aidan McGeady must be on a fair wedge now that we've got those restrictions. Where is Aidan McGeady's career at the moment when it comes to Sunderland?
Well, interesting one. While you're touching on about players, Phil Parkinson confirmed at the weekend, they are looking at Danny Graham and hoping to bring him in. So fingers crossed, that might be another one in the pipeline.
Yeah.
McGeady at the moment is not training because he's had obviously the extended season with Charlton. Mm-hmm. My feeling is when he comes back, I think Phil Parkinson will look to move him out on loan again. I think Parkinson bringing in Elliot Embleton and Jack Diamond as well, and giving them a pathway into the first team probably puts a bit of a squeeze on McGeady as well. And I think, bearing in mind last season and the scenario that unfolded, I think it would be uncomfortable, for want of a better word, McGeady coming back in to that environment. It was interesting, I spoke to Aidan O'Brien after the game on Saturday, and bearing in mind Lewis Morgan's remarks the other week in his interview about all the cliques at the football club and the cliques in the dressing room, Aidan O'Brien was at pains to point out that there don't appear to be any groups within the dressing room, since his arrival. And he's not been here long, but he was very, he said that was one thing that he was very mindful of, because when he got promoted with Millwall from League One into the Championship, that was one very pertinent thing about the Millwall dressing room. There were no cliques in it. And he says that's what he's found at Sunderland. So, if there was a lot of speculation about McGeady last season, the influence he was having in the dressing room, which was sort of, the fire was stoked by Lewis Morgan in that respect. So I just feel that I think Phil Parkinson will probably feel, and I suspect Aidan McGeady may well feel, that it could be, slightly uncomfortable. And my gut feeling is that McGeady will be probably, that they will try and loan him out again this season. I might be wrong. I think McGeady would be quite prepared to come back and play, no question. I think, he and his family are quite settled here. So, if he does come back and he's in the squad, well and good. But I just think that with the way the squad's developing and the numbers, it might be unlikely.
It's interesting you mentioned Lewis Morgan. I was going to come on to that because, and I must say, the pod god that he is, Cypher, I absolutely love his show, but I actually found myself clenching my fists as I was watching that Lewis Morgan, specifically his Sunderland bit. There seemed to be almost like a hero worship in there of Aidan McGeady, which is a little bit weird. And you mentioned about Cattermole and how they didn't speak. Now, I can't claim to know Lee Cattermole, but, I'm sure just like you, I've had a few conversations with him. And the one thing I can say about Lee Cattermole, he's the most professional man that I've probably ever spoken to from a footballer perspective, and doesn't seem like to be the kind of person that would not speak to another individual or let what Lewis Morgan said was going on. Now, on the flip side, obviously, I've had Mark McNulty on the show. I've had a few players that I've played with Aidan McGeady, and they've all been pretty much said, nothing actually happened. It was a case of Parkinson didn't get on with McGeady, and that's it. And that sometimes happens, and that's a totally normal, natural thing. But then Morgan's comments make you think, well, hang on a moment. But they were also a little bit disrespectful, sounded a little bit hero worshipy for my liking. Where do you think the truth is with Aidan McGeady? Somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, probably is. I think McGeady's he is an intelligent guy. I mean, Chris Maguire's comments about him on the club podcast last week when he said that McGeady's an intelligent man. He is
allegedly so. Yeah.
When you speak to him, he's very, very intense. He's very intelligent. He is utterly sort of driven to try and do well. And clearly, I think Lewis Morgan's comments, for instance, about McGeady coming to the dressing room after Morgan said the Burton game. In fact, it was the Accrington Stanley game, and telling the younger players that they or having a go at the players for sort of withering in front of the criticism from the fans. And but I've spoken to a couple of players since then. Stephen Elliott was one. We had a conversation last week. It happens in dressing rooms all the time. You come off the pitch, he's not been good, and one of the players will just turn around and in generally, without singling anybody out, say, look, if you, I think McGeady's at the stage in his career where this is the level, League One, he's probably going to end his career now. But there are players in that dressing room who are potentially looking at long careers now at a higher level. And I think his comments, taken out of context by Lewis Morgan and more generally, fired out in the dressing room after the game at the younger players to say, I'm not going anywhere now, but you can. But if you are going to go anywhere, you've got to learn how to deal with the pressure of these situations, which is, again, something that Chris Maguire touched on in his podcast last week. He made the very same point. But there's not been a hue and cry about Chris Maguire's comments. But because I think McGeady's seen as a bad boy, then his context is sometimes taken and blown out of proportion. I think, if Kevin Ball or Roy Keane had made the same comments, they'd be applauded. But because it's Aidan McGeady, the image he's got, in the same way that Lee Cattermole had an image as a bad boy on the pitch, but actually, over the last couple of seasons in League One, when he wasn't actually picking up that many yellow cards, let alone red cards. So you do, their sort of their image does sort of sometimes go before them, and I think perhaps sometimes unfairly. I think sometimes you forget players like Cattermole, like McGeady. They've been around a long time. They've come from very sort of demanding on themselves backgrounds, if you like, and they all they want is that from others. They want to see that commitment from, and you only had to hear Cattermole on the pitch where he used to scream and shout and cajole because they just want the best. They want the others, to lift their game, if you like.
Yeah, and the thing is with McGeady, I mean, again, I've never been in a football dressing room as a player, so I'm talking from no experience at all. But with McGeady, someone who's played in the Champions League, played Premier League, played for Celtic, won leagues, won divisions, you'd want to absorb that kind of information from McGeady. And I think if Lewis Morgan's comments were to make it sound like McGeady was like hard done by or was the best player in the dressing room, and the rest of the club was a waste of time outside of Aidan McGeady. I think he's done it in the wrong way, because I think Aidan would have probably been quite upset with those comments, because I think it came across the wrong way. And you said before, I think the context which Lewis Morgan's taken it is completely incorrect. Do you think that if it was, should I say, put it this way, Lewis Morgan's comments were ill-advised, and do you agree with them at all? Do you think there's any substance in them?
I don't think they're ill-advised. I think he did a podcast with a former player. I think, sometimes players in that environment get sort of lulled into this false sense of security, if you like, feel that they're chatting to a mate, and they probably speak a bit more openly than they probably would if it was you or I doing the interview. And I think Simon Ferry's a very good friend of Aidan McGeady's, actually. But
I think so.
From what I can gather, people speak a lot about Simon Ferry in Scotland, and I just think that Lewis Morgan, I think, made some comments which weren't really thought through. I think he undermined himself in a sense when he made those comments about Wembley in the playoff final, being told several days before the final that he wasn't playing, and yet on the day of the final his head wasn't right and he wasn't ready to come on. I just think, when you make comments like that as a professional footballer, you're undermining the comments you're making about Aidan McGeady. On the one hand, you're talking about Aidan McGeady and you're saying he's this and he's that, but that was demonstrating that McGeady's got very high standards. At the same time as you're admitting yourself that your standards are nowhere near that, because you couldn't get your head right to come off the bench at Wembley in a playoff final, which at that point in Lewis Morgan's career must be one of the biggest games he's ever played in. So I find that, slightly disingenuous, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Last point on Sunderland, which is probably going to go down a real rabbit hole here. So we'll say it's the last point, but it probably won't be. But I'll openly hold my hands up and say I think Danny Graham would be a good signing. I don't see any problem with it. I know it's not future-proof because he's 35 now, I think. But I mean, Blackburn Rovers fans have raved about him in a division above for the past few seasons, and I think he's a step up on what we've got. That I could be wrong, I could be right. That's football, but that seems like it's edging closer. He even spoke about it on his own Instagram page. He said he doesn't know, which to me is footballers speak for. We'll soon see. Then Parkinson's comments as well. How close is Danny Graham, do you think?
I think he probably is close, and I think I've got no problem with him for this season. I mean, he said his age. I think ultimately this season Sunderland have got to get promotion, and I think you do it by hook or by crook. And if Danny Graham is going to, score goals for Sunderland at this level, which is there's nothing to suggest he won't, as you say, is from his record at Blackburn, I think you can just forget his last time here in the Premier League. It was a while ago, and the circumstances are so changed and so different. So different that I don't think you can use that as a benchmark or a barometer. No. But I think I would lose no sleep in signing Danny Graham, even if it's only a season deal. You want to try and find. I mean, bearing in mind, it's quite obvious that Sunderland aren't going to spend any money on transfer fees this summer. The opportunity to sign someone of his experience when strikers are so sought after, I would take him. It might be a gamble, but it's a gamble that could well pay off. And I think it's one that I'd certainly buy into if it means that Sunderland can get promotion this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% on board with you. If he scores 15, 20 goals this season and Sunderland go up, job done. We could pay £1 million for another version of a Charlie Wyke, or we can have a Danny Graham who's proven on a free at this well above this level. But that does bring into question the likes of, I thought Greg looked good on Saturday, but it's one game and it's 5 months since we played. I want to see that consistently. But Charlie Wyke came in for a lot of criticism, which I must admit, I think on the flip side, after 5 months, no game time, maybe a little unfair, but that was like glaring opportunity that I still don't know how he missed. But where does that leave his future if you're bringing in Danny Graham? Is Charlie Wyke then suddenly striker number 2?
Probably. But I think you live or die by the sword, don't you, as a footballer? If you're not producing the goods, why would you expect to be in the first team? And I think, you remember Will Griggs' comments earlier in the summer about, he couldn't understand why he wasn't playing. Well, it's not rocket science. He wasn't doing it. So exactly, you're on the bench. If Charlie Wyke, and I accept you're absolutely right. It was the first game of, pre-season. He didn't, for me, stamp any sort of authority on the game, bearing in mind, his height and presence. Our Kosovan, Albanian, Swiss friend imposed more authority on the game than Charlie. But and that sort of weak sort of finish didn't inspire you sort of with confidence. But But, as you said, it's the first game. But I do think if Danny Graham comes in, he will probably be ahead of Charlie Wyke in the pecking order at the moment, depending on how he performs, I suppose, in pre-season and in training. But, Phil Parkinson, any manager, has always said, you always want cover in every position. And I think every player's got to accept there should be someone behind them who wants their place in the team. And that's, tantamount on that player in the team then to maintain their form to stop that person getting in the team.
Yeah.
And I think, with that in mind, Sunderland need that strength and depth this season. And gradually, I think we're seeing that they're starting to fulfill that with the players that are coming in drips and drabs at the moment, but they are slowly but surely coming in.
I think you touched on before that you don't think we'll spend money on a transfer fee. I wish we would, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, when you're looking at a League One season, every single pre-season it's a bunch of loan signings and free transfers across the board. That's, add into the fact you've got the salary cap this year as well. But I still think, and you've touched on the wingers before, I think we're quite weak in midfield. I think we still need someone strong and powerful in the middle. So I still think we could do with a few more bodies. How many players do you expect Sunderland to at least try and bring in before the season starts?
Well, I agree with you about midfield totally. I think that there's nobody at the moment, to my mind, stamps any sort of real authority in the centre. Phil Parkinson said, 2-3 weeks ago, that he was looking to bring in 7 or 8 players. They brought in 3, 4 now, is it? Bailey Wright, Feeney,
4,
Matthews, O'Brien. Yeah, it's 4. So we're looking at 3 more. If Danny Graham's one of them, that's 5. I think you're probably right about a left-sided player, probably be 6, and possibly someone else in midfield, 7. Now, we haven't looked at the 2 fullbacks, whether there's going to be fullback cover as well, so it could even be 8. But then are we then saying, are we looking at 7 permanent signings and maybe 2, 3 low signings, and then you're going to balance the squad because the number of players you can have over the age of 21 or whatever, and so on, and so that'll have to be taken into account as well. But I think we could see 7 permanents and maybe a couple of loan signings.
Do you think the deals for Garbutt's completely dead due to the salary cap? Do you think that's just done?
I think I think his wages, from what I understand, the wages is the stumbling block. Suddenly Sunderland have found their wage scale heavily restricted, and I think players like Garbutt, who are moving from a Premier League club, of his experience, unlike Feeney, I think wages are going to be an issue.
Do you think if it wasn't,
it would be nice to think it's not, but I think realistically,
I think it is. Do you think that would have been quite close? Do you think Garbutt was kind of up for joining Sunderland had it not been?
I certainly think he would have been. He'd have been interested. I mean, you've been, if you're professional football, why wouldn't you be interested? I mean, look at the size of the club. So I think that interest was certainly there. But I think when you look at Charlie Good leaving Northampton for Brentford for £1 million, and suddenly the landscape is changing, because getting out of League One now into the Championship is getting as hard as getting out of the Championship into the Premier League. It really is dog eat dog, and there are some. I think it's going to be a difficult season, because I think there'll be clubs like Peterborough, arguably Oxford, Ipswich, Portsmouth. It's going to be tough at the top. Charlton possibly. With now that they're sort of starting to settle down a bit with the ownership issue and so on. And Wigan, again, they come through this whole ownership issue situation. There's 7 or 8 clubs who are probably much of a muchness. It's going to be, and Barnsley even. So it's going to be, it's going to be tough. There's no question. And I'm not sure at the moment Sunderland are showing that they're head and shoulders above anybody else. I think it is looking like quite a level playing field.
I suppose my final question then with Sunderland would be, what is your hopes and thoughts? And I'm thinking head rather than heart here, because I know both with our heart we're both going to win the league. But with head, how do you feel Sunderland are going to get on? And I know we've still got a few weeks and potentially a few more signings, but it's make or break, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is make or break this season, because they don't. The the sort of thought of a fourth season in League One is just terrifying. And I think my gut feeling is that, the last two seasons, while they've been disappointing in terms of the way they finished, Sunderland were there or thereabouts in both seasons. And I don't think there's any reason to think that they won't be again this season. Now, by where there or thereabouts, do I mean automatic promotion come third or fourth finish, or sixth or seventh, finish and playoffs all the way? I don't know. I think there are some teams, Peterborough historically always fly out the blocks but fall away. I think Blackpool have got, they've made some astute signings. They may again start really well and fall away. I think Sunderland have got to show that sort of stubbornness that they've shown the last couple of seasons of being just steady. But they've got to add something to their game to make sure that those games which they sort of narrowly won or drew, they have to win them more convincingly. Take games like Fleetwood. The fact they've never beaten Fleetwood. Yeah. That is something they've got to address. They've got to beat Fleetwood at home, and they've got to go and beat Fleetwood away. Those are the games that, crucially, when it comes down to it, will be the games that determine where you finish in terms of the promotion places, I think.
With the stadium and things like that, do you think there's a lot made about Sunderland fans, and we are expectant, rightly so, especially in this division, we should be. But do you think that will help or hinder having no fans for the first few games?
It's really odd. I think it clearly had an impact on teams who finished the season in the Championship and the Premier League. I mean, I'm thinking predominantly here, Brentford, for instance. Yeah. I think if Brentford had they've been able to have the crowds in at Griffin Park for their last couple of games, or even that Barnsley game, bearing in mind it was Brentford's last game at Griffin Park. They only had to get a point against Barnsley. Had there been crowd in there, I think it would have made a difference for them. So, yes, it's going to be the same for everybody, obviously. But I do feel it's going to make a difference to teams at the start when there isn't anybody in the ground. I think it's going to be surreal. It's going to be very strange, and it's very difficult. I think this is where psychology in football comes to the fore. I think those teams that have got a very strong mentality could possibly take advantage in this situation, and that's something Sunderland, I think, have got to address. I think Nick Allenby is someone who'll be very much across that as the fitness coach, and he's very into those psychology. I think this opening month of the season could be where you really do sort of lay down a marker. If you can come through strongly games when there are no crowds and build up some sort of momentum, then I think it puts you in a very, very good position going into October when the crowds start coming back in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be a weird situation, and I do think, like you said before, October sounds about the right sort of time. So, what we'll do is I've got a couple of questions from Twitter, and we'll end on that because it's been a couple of them. Most of them about the takeover, of course. I think we've covered that. We're going to be rich come October. I think you said we've got a billionaire coming in, Nick. Is that right?
That'll be all over Twitter later, don't we?
I'm going to turn Twitter off, I think, once I've done this. Actually, there's a really, really good question here. Do you think the squad is stronger or weaker than last time around?
Good question. I think at the moment it's weaker. But I think going back to what we were talking about earlier about the centre-backs, I think now that's looking much, much more healthy. The two keepers, okay, they're League One. I think you've got two competent keepers.
Yeah.
If Danny Graham comes in for the reasons that we were talking about earlier, fine. If the promise we saw from Saturday's cameo, if that grows, if that gets better, or if that carries on, yeah, that's got to be a positive. Lyndon Gooch, Chris Maguire, Elliot Embleton, Jack Diamond. I think, it's beginning to look like we could be looking at a stronger squad. I don't say significantly stronger because of the few areas that you and I mentioned before, central midfield, for instance.
Yeah.
But I think there's a balance, much more of a balance to it than perhaps they had last season. And with a couple more signings, then I would feel a little bit more optimistic. And I think it's crucial then that they start well. I think that's the other caveat to all this. I think, whatever happens, it's got to be a good start. I don't want to be coming away from the Stadium of Light on September the 12th talking about a Jack Baldwin winner for Bristol Rovers. I want to see Sunderland, start the season, with a solid win over Bristol Rovers to take into what are, the next 4 games are very, very tough games with, bearing in mind what we said about who could be involved in the promotion stakes.
With the Jack Diamonds you talked about before, there was rumours going around that Harrogate were looking to bring him back on loan. I don't feel like that's going to happen. Is he very much?
No, I think that's largely come from the Harrogate manager, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Paul Thirlwell's there now, of course, as assistant. I think looking at what comments Phil Parkinson's made about Jack and Elliot, I think they are in the first team squad now. And what we saw of them certainly Jack on Saturday, I liked. I think the noise about Jack going back to Harrogate is being largely generated by Harrogate rather than by Sunderland. So I think now is an opportunity for Jack, and especially when we only today there's been lots of talk about Benji Kimpioka. He's in Sweden. He's sort of making noises about keep on using that word, noises. Talking about the attraction of the contract. This is an opportunity, as a few people have pointed out, where Jack Diamond can steal a march on Benji Kimpioka. He's here. He's playing pre-season. He's involved in the games. This is a big opportunity for Jack, and I'm sort of minded to think Phil Parkinson's prepared to give him that opportunity, and Elliot as well, certainly. I think Jack will be part of the setup.
That was one of the questions as well about Benji. Obviously, the news today. I'll be honest, I've never been enamoured by Benji Kimpioka. I think if you got anything about yourself, you would have been in the first team by now. And there's a lot of, and I'll say the same as you, a lot of noise coming from him about how he wants to stay at Sun and stuff like that. And I think his agent does a lot of speak, so it seems. But do you think with that one, it's just dead in the water? Do you think there's any point in trying to give him a contract, or does it sound more hassle than it's worth? Because it does to me.
It's a difficult one because you wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to be sitting here in 2 years' time and saying, "Oh, well, we let Benji Kimpioka go,"
exactly.
And he turns out to be having a world beater. But at the same time, like you, he's not really proved to me in the sort of short bursts we've seen of him that he's got anything than this sort of explosive hand grenade like quality that you don't know what he's going to give. You just don't know what Benji's going to do for you on the pitch. And I know he's frustrating in that sense for the coaches because they're trying to coach him and tell him to do things and he's doing the opposite or not doing it. And from conversations I've had with various scouts or coaches from other clubs who obviously come to the Academy Light when there's behind closed doors games, they've not been wildly complimentary about him, even if in terms of if he was made available for loan, whether they would take him or not. So I wouldn't, if I had to put, at the moment I would say I wouldn't lose any sleep if Benji didn't sign.
Yeah, same. And I mean, hopefully, he does go on to, whether it be in Sunderland or not, I don't wish the guy any ill, but it just seems at the moment, from a purely Sunderland point of view, as we speak on the 24th of the 8th, 2020, in case this comes back to bite me on the arse, it seems much ado about nothing, doesn't it?
Yeah, I just think if you're now in pre-season, 2 weeks away from the start of the season, talking about money and contracts, I think your mind's in the wrong place. I think you should be talking about the football and wanting to play football and wanting to get back playing football. And so that's why I think it sits a little bit uneasily with me actually at the moment.
Yeah, same. Absolutely. I echo everything you've just said there, 100%. Last question comes from Jay Herrera, 18. We've kind of touched on it already, but I'll kind of throw the end of his question at you. Talking about the exclusivity talk about, that was like 3 weeks ago, I think. And he said there's not been much of an update since, which we've kind of covered anyway. But he says, do you think it could just be Donald using yourself and other people to feed fans false information because he feels that he's done that in the past, or do you think there's credence behind it?
I just still come back to the conversation I had with Stuart Donald at the Stadium of Light that day. I did that interview with him, and obviously I spoke to him after that as well. He was adamant that he's getting out, adamant that he's not going to stay around. He's even had to change his telephone number because of the abuse he'd been getting on his old number. And so I think the fact that it has been quiet and nothing's coming out, as I said before, doesn't surprise me. I just don't think it's. I think that is, I would argue that's common practice. I think any club that's taken over, it's if you start, as the club themselves are saying, and they don't want to make any comment because they don't want things to be taken out, misconstrued. And I think that's one good reason for not saying anything and for the silence. My gut instinct still is that he will be leaving and the club will be sold. And I think I said this a long time ago, I think it's best for everybody concerned. I think it was right they came in and the time was right for new owners of Ellis Shaw. It reached a point where it was at rock bottom. It needed a change. And I think that is the case again now. To move forwards, it needs a change. It needs fresh input. It needs new investment. It needs new faces to change the dynamic, to change the storyline, to, I think, reinvigorate, if you like, again. It's like the Doctor and the TARDIS, isn't it? It's like the Doctor has to go through this sort of process. I think Sunderland Football Club do as well. It just and now is that time. It has to happen. I think Stuart Donald is very mindful of that. Like him, loathe him, hate him, think he's a charlatan, think he's a cheat, whatever. I think there is a process taking place, and that in the next few weeks, that hopefully then that will engender some sort of change.
Yeah, hopefully. Nick, thanks so much for joining me, mate. And fingers crossed when we're speaking next time, we're talking about, in my opinion, a new owner and a couple of wins as well, and fans hopefully back in the stadium. But pleased to see you doing well. Please, football's back. And thanks as always for the updates, mate. Thank you.
No problem at all. Good. Pleasure.
Spot on.